Hi everyone. This video is on the 5 pillars of sadhana. Now, the 5 pillars of sadhana is a subject that you can actually find more information on in the book by my spiritual master Swami Veda Bharati. The book's titled Nightbirds, and in there you'll find a chapter titled 5 Pillars of Sadhana. So the 5 pillars of sadhana is really 5 distinct ways of practice involving your relationships and objects of the world, objects of your senses, which will help you to cultivate a more meditative mind and help to give power and momentum to your yoga practice, your sadhana. Now, the 5 pillars of sadhana, as it's called, are really 5 distinct ways of getting in touch with what Swami Rama used to call the 4 primitive fountains. Now, the 4 primitive fountains are essentially the 4 essential drives, essential motivations of almost all human behavior. They're the 4 motivations of all behavior in animals, and this is something that humans have in common with animals. We also have these 4 primitive fountains. So the 4 primitive fountains are food, sleep, sex, and self-preservation. So those are the 4 primary essential drives to behavior in the world. And Swami Rama mentioned a number of times that these are also the 4 causes of all of our negative emotions. Emotion and the habits of the mind is something that is very much affecting your meditation practice. Whatever negative emotions and negative mental habits and thereby mental conflicts that are experienced and created in life outside of the meditation are then, of course, taken into the meditation, and they have to be dealt with and met there. And so the 5 pillars of sadhana is really a way to not suppress those 4 primitive fountains, because they can't be suppressed or denied. The idea in yoga practice is never to practice suppression or repression of our natural drives, but rather to cultivate a relationship with those drives that allows them to be transformed into a means of meditation and into a means of deepening our meditation and deepening our stability and mental clarity. So those 4 primitive fountains are not necessarily something bad. They're certainly not something to be denied or repressed, but they are something that can be transformed into a means for the 5th fountain of motivation in human beings, which is the fountain of, sometimes called the fountain of joy, which is also that very natural instinct, very natural drive that we all have, very sattvic drive of the desire to know, the desire to discover, and the desire to understand, which ultimately is arising from that very deep desire for self-knowledge or enlightenment. So those 4 primitive fountains can be transformed into means to serve that 5th fountain of joy and self-realization. So the 5 pillars of sadhana are means of doing that, specific practices to do that. So let's just go through them. So we have stillness, silence, fasting, celibacy, and conquest of sleep. So let's just first talk briefly about stillness. Stillness is one of those practices that has many practical facets, can be practiced in many different ways, and can be practiced at different levels of intensity. So a very basic practice of stillness is that time that you sit in your meditation posture, make your body balanced and comfortable, yet still, go inside and remain physically still for however long your meditation is for. And also in that physical stillness, the endeavor, the process of becoming more and more still at more and more subtle and subtler levels. So balancing your body, balancing your breath and calming your breath down so that it starts to go towards a state of deeper and deeper subtlety, and eventually balancing your mind and drawing your mind into that single flow of awareness of meditation, and thereby bringing your mind to a deeper experience of stillness. So getting still on all of those different levels of your personality. So that's one kind of stillness. Stillness also means the practice of stillness in your physical yoga practice. Now that's really a subject for another entire video. But just in brief, the process of, in your physical yoga practice, making each and every posture a process, a journey from stillness to stillness. And enjoying that stillness in the beginning of the process, enjoying that stillness of the posture, and then dissolving the posture back into stillness. So that's a subject I'd like to make another video on, called probably 6 steps of meditative asanas. Now stillness can also mean practicing to remain in one place. For example, during a particular period of intense practice, such as a silence retreat, making the sankalpa that I will remain within the grounds of the ashram, the grounds of the spiritual location where I'm practicing. One kind of stillness. Or, even more intense, I will remain within this small room. Or, making the resolve, the sankalpa, that I will remain in this small space, 3 meter by 3 meter or 2 meter by 2 meter space, for the entire duration of my practice for however many days. So this is a kind of practice of stillness. And the practice of stillness is really stilling all the faculties of one's being, eventually to try to come to that experience of deep stillness of the mind. So then stillness leads into the practice of silence, really. So then the practice of silence, again, has many levels, many aspects to it. So an initial practice of silence can simply be silencing the intention to speak. So silencing one's voice, silencing for any period of time, a number of hours or a number of days or weeks or months or even years, silencing the speech and therefore the speech organs, and eventually through that practice attempting to come to deeper levels of silence in the mind. But this also takes on many other aspects. So silence in the practice of one's japa, of one's mantra repetition. So rather than speaking the mantra out, and rather than even the mantra being in the vocal cords, in the throat, on the lips or on the tongue, leading one's mind into deeper and deeper levels of subtlety, to feel the vibration of the mantra only in the mind and at more and more subtle levels. So that's another practice of silence. Then we have fasting. Fasting initially means keeping a moderate diet. So Swami Veda often used to say that the most difficult form of fasting and the most helpful form of fasting is eating moderately. With this, as with all of the other pillars of sadhana, any kind of practice which is done, which is harmful to the body, is not considered a legitimate practice. So fasting certainly to weaken the body and harm the body is not what's intended here, but rather really becoming aware of one's relationship to food and deepening that awareness and improving one's relationship with food. So eating and learning to really taste the food that you're eating. Tasting the food not just with the tongue, but tasting the food with the whole digestive system and with the whole body. And thereby tasting the food and intuitively knowing what food my body needs at this time. So that is really one very deep significance of the idea of fasting. And then, of course, learning to understand one's emotional relationship and dynamics related to food. So if there is a habit to take food and to overeat in order to fill an emotional void, a sense of lack of satisfaction, possibly in other areas of life, coming in touch with that, recognizing that, and learning to deal with that emotional dynamic. And so that's the idea of fasting. So fasting then can be experimented with in India. You have so many different kinds of fasting at different times of the year. There will be so many different spiritual festivals and spiritually auspicious moments throughout the year, and different kind of fasting prescribed for those different times. So those are also ways to experiment with that relationship that we have to food, that dynamic, the basic drive for food, and to learn to, rather than allowing that drive to master us and to direct our mind and actions, to master that drive and to transform it into a means to meditation. So learning to really enjoy the food, tasting the food, and using that experience of taste as an object of meditation itself, as a window into a deep experience of internal fullness and internal stability and one-pointedness. So that is fasting. Then we have celibacy. Now, celibacy, again, doesn't mean the denial or the repression of the sexual drive. Rather, it means, again, transforming and learning to understand really what that drive is and how it can be used in a way that is then deepening one's meditation, and also at the same time improving one's relationships. So one of the stages of celibacy is keeping a loving, monogamous relationship. And in that relationship, deepening the experience to be one of more and more selfless love, and thereby automatically, spontaneously, a relationship that is less driven by selfish desire and selfish self-satisfaction. And then we have conquest of sleep. So conquest of sleep, again, is really the practice of understanding what is the experience of sleep, understanding that need that we have, and really learning to enjoy first the experience of sleep. Now, one of the most traditional ways of doing this in the yoga tradition is through the practice of yoga nidra. And yoga nidra is really the practice of learning to deepen one's attachment to the physical sensations and physical form, and to go to more and more subtle levels of awareness of one's body, from physical body to subtle body. And thereby, in deepening the relaxation and letting go of the physical preoccupation, learning to also draw one's conscious awareness into the state of deep, dreamless sleep intentionally, and to then really enjoy that experience and to remain conscious and aware to enjoy it. So the practice of yoga nidra is really the practice of conquest of sleep par excellence. It's the most beautiful way that I'm aware of to go into a deeper understanding of sleep and to transform that, to again take that one of the four primitive fountains and turn it into a means of a deeper level of awareness and an avenue into meditation, something to strengthen the meditation as well. So practice of Yoga Nidra, very important element of conquest of sleep, but also then we have just changing, very gradually and gently changing one's habits. So if there is a habit to linger in the bed in the morning once the alarm has gone off or once one has woken up naturally, slowly, gradually changing that habit, transforming the habit to have the spontaneous and natural inclination to get up and to begin one's yoga practice, to begin one's day once you're awake. And so to slowly let go of that tamasic tendency of the mind and the body to dwell and linger in that state, and to be attached to that experience of being in the bed and being in the experience of sleep and also dream. Now again, that's not something to be rushed into too quickly. You don't want to deprive yourself of the sleep that you need to live a healthy life. So it's best to take all of these 5 pillars of sadhana carefully, go gently with yourself, and make it a gradual process of self-exploration, understanding, and a gradual process of, again, not repression, but of transformation of these drives that we have, very powerful drives, the transformation of that energy in those drives into a means for meditation and a means for deepening your yoga practice. Okay, so that's just a brief outline of the 5 pillars of sadhana, 5 distinct ways of practice in daily life, practice with the 4 primitive fountains, practice with the objects of the world and with relationships in order to transform those dynamics into means for deepening your meditation. So hope that it was helpful and wish you all beautiful meditations and happy relationships. Okay, see you next time.